Goggles off. New plan. Hit them. Hard. Roll right over them if you can. Brace yourself. Don't lose control of the car. She grabbed the dash with one hand.
Hello there,
her
and
seat
welcome
with
to the
other.
golf club.
Daniel
Pretty
shoved the
pumped
goggles to
be
his
out
forehead
today,
and floored the
having
gas
some
pedal.
golf.
She wished
See if
there
we
was
can
a
do
way to
it there on
secure
the
the
tee.
dogs. They were going to feel this. The other car didn't react to their charge until the last second, like maybe its occupants had been watching behind them rather than out front. Or maybe, with the headlights and running lights off and the matte black paint, the Humvee was mostly invisible in the night. It was a mid-size SUV, white. Once he saw them, the driver veered off to her right. Daniel jerked the wheel right, and the
Nice.
Humvee
Should be in the
plowed into the
fairway.
passenger side of the SUV with a deafening shriek of tearing metal and the explosive pop of safety glass crumpling.
And we have
The
about,
dogs flew forward.
I'd say,
A shower of
140-ish
metallic
yards from
clanks
here.
and jangles sounded, while Khan's body crashed heavily into the back of both the driver's and the passenger seat. Alex's head whipped forward, but missed the dashboard by inches when the seatbelt yanked her back. The SUV flew a few feet away, tottered on two wheels for a second, then smashed, driver side first, into the ground. The passenger side headlight burst with another explosion of glass. Khan and Einstein whimpered, falling back to the floor. "Again!" she yelled. Daniel slammed the front of the Humvee into the undercarriage
Now
of
that
the
was a swing.
SUV. Metal protested and squealed. The SUV slid across the flat yard like it weighed no more than a cardboard box. She could see they weren't going to be able to roll it. There was nothing to push it against, just the endless grass.
Starting things off at
Cover
one
me.
under.
She snagged the goggles off his head. Use the night scope on the rifle.
Okay,
Einstein,
here we go.
come. Alex didn't wait for a response. She was out of the Humvee before it was totally stopped. Einstein's toenails scrabbled against the back of her wet jeans as he hurried to join her. She had to move fast before the men in the car could recover from the impact, before they could get their automatic weapons back into play. She ran straight for the windshield, Glock held tight in both hands. She was better with the Sig Sauer, but this was going to be extremely close up, and she
Great
would probably want
contact.
to ditch the gun afterward. Everything was incredibly clear through the lenses, bright green with vibrant contrasts. The driver's side headlight was still
So I
on,
would say
but
we're
buried
about
in the ground,
240
so it emitted
yards
only a
from the pin
low,
here.
hazy glow in the dust they'd churned up. The windshield frame was entirely empty, and she could see two men in the front seats, two deflated airbags from the initial impact hanging across the hood. The driver was a bloody mess, the top of his head pressing tight against the side door frame, his thick neck bent at an impossible angle. She could see one eye open, staring sightlessly at her. He looked young, early 20s, with
Solid
ruddy skin,
swing.
light hair, and the kind of overbuilt anatomy that screamed steroids. He might have been an agent, except the rest of his look was wrong. His hair was about 8 inches long, and there was an ostentatious diamond stud in the one earlobe she could see. She would bet he was hired muscle. He didn't look like he'd been a decision maker. The passenger was moving, his head wobbling confusedly, as if he were just coming around. He was older than the other, maybe mid-30s, and swarthy, with a thick 3-day growth on his cheeks, burly through the middle in the way that men who lifted the really heavy weights sometimes were. She'd bet he was a bull on his feet. He was wearing a well-fitting, shiny suit that seemed inappropriate for this kind of operation, but rang a few bells for her. Still strapped in his seat, he was right about at her eye level. She approached swiftly and jammed the barrel of her gun into his forehead, glancing down to see what his hands were doing. They were currently empty and limp. "Are you in charge?" she demanded.
Huh?
He moaned. "Who is your boss?"
Accident. We've been in an accident, officer.
He told her, blinking into the dark. His eyes seemed to be moving just slightly out of sync with each other. She modified her approach, pulling the gun back and softening her voice. "Help is coming. I need to know how many of you there are."
6.
That meant there were 4 more, possibly heading out toward the sound of the crash right now. At least the dogs were beginning to congregate around her, all of them on silent mode thanks to Einstein's presence. She wondered if they would have remembered her if she were alone.
And that'll keep you at 1 under
Sir?
for the round.
She asked, trying to imagine how a cop would speak to someone in a car accident.
And,
Where are the others?
What is this? Hole number 3.
He said, his rolling eyes starting to move more purposefully.
The others are hitchhikers. We picked up 4 men and dropped them off here. Then there were dogs. Crazy dogs attacking us. I thought they were going to chew through the tires.
He was gaining more control, spinning the story carefully. He made a fist, then released it. She raised the gun again and kept her eyes on his hands. Were these hitchhikers hurt in the attack?
I think so. I think maybe 2 of them. The others went in the house.
So hopefully there were only 2 others. But was this guy in charge? The age was right. However, she picked up a few things during her time in Chicago. In an orchestrated hit, usually the guys left in the car were lower on the totem pole. The driver was secondary. The star of the show would be the one the contract was made with. The one with the skills.
I think I need a doctor,
he complained. An ambulance is on the way. The light from the SUV's one surviving headlight was almost entirely blocked by thick grass and settling dirt, but there was enough that his eyes were beginning to adjust. She saw them widen when he abruptly realized there was a gun in his face. He made a grab inside his jacket. She fired around into his right shoulder. She didn't want to aim for the hand and take the chance of the bullet passing through and into a vital organ. She wasn't done with him yet. He screamed, and his right arm jerked out in a pain spasm, flinging blood across her neck and chin. The gun he'd been reaching for slipped from his fingers, dropped onto his dead companion's face, then bounced out of the car and against her shoe. She knew it wouldn't be his only weapon, so she aimed down and shot him through the palm of his left hand. He howled again and struggled against the seatbelt, as if he were trying to hurl himself through the empty windshield frame at her. Something was wrong with his legs. He couldn't get the purchase he was looking for. The action had roused the dogs, who were all snarling now. Einstein launched himself at the passenger side of the car, which was currently the top side. Bracing his paws against the frame of the missing window, he stretched his neck into the SUV and locked his massive jaws around the man's right shoulder, the one she'd just shot.
Get it off me! Get it off me!
The man shrieked in abject terror. She took advantage of his total distraction to grab the gun at her foot.
We got hole number 4.
It was a cheap .38. Safety off. Einstein, control, Alex ordered as she straightened. It was the only command she remembered besides escape protocol and at ease, and control seemed closest to what she wanted. Einstein let go of the shoulder, but kept his teeth right in the man's face, slavering spots of bloody saliva onto his skin.
Who are you?
Looks like you may be getting wet here.
I'm the person who is going to have this animal chew your face off if you don't tell me what I want to know in the next 30 seconds.
Keep it away.
Who's in charge?
Hector. He brought us in.
Where is he?
In the house. He went in and didn't come out. Angel went in after him and didn't come out. The dogs were going to rip the doors off the car. We bailed.
Who was on the sniper rifle? Hector? Einstein snapped his teeth inches from the terrified man's nose.
Yes, yes.
She'd never thought of using animals in an interrogation, but Einstein was an unexpectedly effective asset. Hector was going to make the hit?
Yes.
Who was the target?
I don't know. We're just supposed to drive and shoot anyone who tried to leave.
Einstein, get him. It wasn't the best improv. Einstein's eyes cut over to her, clearly confused. It didn't matter to the man in the SUV.
No! No!
He screamed.
I swear! Hector didn't tell us. Those Puerto Rican hitters don't tell outsiders anything.
How did you find this place?
Hector gave us the addresses.
Plural? More than one?
There were 3 houses on the list. We did the first one earlier. Hector said it was the wrong place.
What did you do there?
Hector went in. 5 minutes later, he came out. Told us to move on to the next.
All right, 13-footer here.
That's all you know?
Yes! Yes, everything!
She shot him in the head twice with his own gun. There was a countdown running in her mind. She had no idea how long it had actually taken to release the dogs, float downstream, and load the Humvee. She didn't know when Hector had entered the house or how long it had taken him to get to her room. What she did know was that the pressurized canister of gas she'd left armed there would continue to quietly exude the chemicals it was packed with for about 15 minutes after someone opened the door.
Okay.
Once the contents ran out, she had maybe 30 minutes more, dependent on the size of the person
it's
involved,
time to send this ball
before
on
the
its
quarry
way.
was back on his feet. It was going to be close. She jumped into the Humvee, holding the door open so Einstein could climb over her. She threw the goggles back to Daniel, getting only one glimpse of his face before she was blind again. All she could see was that his expression was tense. "Get us to the house. Same plan as before if anyone comes out. Stop far enough back that you can see the sides of the house. Watch for someone coming around." "The dogs will let me know if they see something." "Right," she agreed.
That was impressive.
The advantages of the pack just kept coming. She removed her PPK and holstered the Glock in its place. She stuck the .38 in her belt, shoved the PPK into the bag at her feet, then dug through that bag, pulling the things she needed by feel. She switched the bulletproof hat for the gas mask, quickly tightened it into place over her mouth and nose, screwed in the filter, then grabbed 2 more pressurized canisters, zip ties, thin tactical gloves, and her earring box. She stowed them in the pockets of her vest. She extracted the heavy bolt cutters last and stuck them through the belt by the empty holster. One handle inside, one out. Though the cutters were compact for their abilities, the handles still reached nearly to her knee. They would impede her movement a little, but if things went the way she wanted, she would need them. She didn't have time to think about what Daniel might be processing right now, how he might feel about her killing a helpless man. The house came into view, all the visible windows downstairs lit. The windows upstairs were blacked out too well for her to be able to tell if the lights were on or not. "Do you see anyone?" "A body, over there." Daniel pointed toward the outbuilding. "We need to make sure he's dead." There were still 3 men unaccounted for. The fewer still breathing, the better her chances. "I'm pretty sure he is. It looks like he's in more than one piece." His voice sounded a little hollow. Hers didn't. "Good." She couldn't see anyone near the house. They weren't dumb enough to run out and see what was going on, apparently. No silhouettes appeared in the windows.
This one's
Surely
a beauty.
they would have shut off the lights if they were going to shoot from one of them. Maybe upstairs. The windows were so
All right,
completely
this next one's for
covered
Birdie.
that she couldn't even tell exactly where they were. Or the blackout treatments had been pulled back, and someone was watching from a darkened room. "Can you see the upstairs windows?" "They all look covered," Daniel told her. "Okay, start slowing. 2 seconds after we're out, stop, and get ready to shoot." He nodded. "Got it." "Einstein, come here. Get ready." Daniel angled the car so that his side was facing into the lights of the house. She hoped she would be invisible on the dark side of the vehicle.
So that'll
She
keep you
opened
at
the door
4
and slid
over
down
for the
toward
round.
the slowly moving grass below. She tried to recreate the move
Okay,
she'd seen in
hole number
100 movies.
6.
She fell to her knees, then rolled onto her side as Einstein leaped over her. She was sure she'd done it wrong, but she wouldn't know how wrong until the survive wore off. She'd forgotten to tell Daniel to close the door and lock everything down, but it was common sense, and he seemed to be thinking quickly tonight. Maybe it was genetics again. He was wired for this kind of situation, just like his brother. Anyway, if someone tried to get into the car, Khan would be waiting. She could imagine what it would feel like if someone who'd already been harried by dozens of attack dogs came face to face with Khan on higher ground in the dark. There was no way this wouldn't affect his aim and reaction time. Even though she had gloves on, crawling across the gravel would have been excruciating if she hadn't drugged herself up. As she hurried away from the Humvee, she heard the rush of her pack's paws approaching in the dry brush. Not just Einstein, but the dozens of other survivors. She'd never had backup like this before. A sniper above would have trouble separating her from the mass. She moved into a crouch next to the porch. The Humvee was stopped now. She heard the door slam.
Nice.
A low whimper, quite near her head, made her freeze. The quiet whine happened again. It wasn't a human sound. She heaved herself up onto the porch, rolled under the banister, and then stayed down, lower than the windows.
You're out of that sand, so that's
Lola
good.
was there, curled up in the far corner. Alex knew that even injured, Lola would sound the alarm if someone else were close by. She crawled to the dog, her gloved hands slipping against a trail of blood. Lola raised her head half an inch, and her tail lifted for one limp wag. "It's going to be okay, Lola. I'm coming right back. You hold on, all right?" She caressed the dog's ears once, and Lola panted softly. Einstein waited in the shadows by the door. Alex crawled to him.
And that'll
Stay
keep
with
you
Lola,
at
Einstein.
4 over for this round.
She couldn't interpret the look he gave her. Hopefully he understood.
Seventh
She had to
hole
go in
coming up.
alone this time. If she got through this night alive, she was going to track down a gas mask made for dogs. Alex crouched beside the door and carefully inserted her earrings. They were out of place, delicate and fussy, next to the rest of her serious gear. But she didn't have time to be worried about appearances, and this could very well get physical. She grabbed the bigger canister from the front pocket of her vest, twisted the top off, pulled the door open, and threw it inside. There was no reaction, no shout or sound of footsteps retreating as the gas filled the room. She waited 2 seconds, then half stood and ran crouched through the doorway with the Glock in her right hand and the shotgun in her left. She would be clumsy with her left hand, but you didn't need good aim with a gun like this, not in close quarters. She didn't bother searching the first floor. If someone tried to come after her in the next 5 minutes and he didn't have a gas mask, he'd be down quick. She played it out in her head as she moved to the stairs. Hector had come inside, searching for Daniel or Kevin or both of them. Because he'd come in alone, she suspected he'd been looking for only 2 people. With Arnie down, he'd think it was one-on-one. Still, he must have been very confident in his abilities to go in solo. He would have had to check all the rooms downstairs. Then he would have tried the doors upstairs.
Okay, so that'll
She was
keep you
halfway
at
up the
4
steps
over
now.
for the round.
The mist spilling from the canister below was heavy. It
Coming
wasn't
off
climbing
a
with
car
her.
on the last one.
Looking
Let's
up,
see what happens
she
here.
could see that Daniel's door was open, as was the bathroom's. Light spilled down from the far right. That could only be her storage room. She holstered the shotgun, crept to the top, put her elbows on the first step down, and leaned around the edge of the banister. A man was down in the hallway, dressed in rugged black pants and combat boots. His head and shoulders rested on another set of legs coming out of her room, these in similar pants, but wearing black sneakers rather than boots. Hector would be the one on the floor in her room, if the man in the suit had described events correctly. He would have opened the door,
Solid
flipped
swing.
on the light, and dropped. After a few minutes, Angel would have come looking to see if he needed help, seen his legs, and slid along the wall with gun in hand until the gas overpowered him.
All right.
She had no idea how
we're right
long
around
they'd been down.
165 yards out.
So far, the man in the suit had been pretty honest with her. It made her feel safe enough to holster the Glock and get started. First, she took the gun she found in the first man's hands and tossed it over the railing to the floor below. There was another gun tucked into the back of his pants. That went over the railing, too. She didn't have time for a better search. She wished she could inject him with something that would keep him quiet. But unlike the gas, which would disappear from his system in the next half hour, the longer-term sedation would linger in his bloodstream and be a dead giveaway to anyone who suspected she might be here. She zip-tied his hands behind his back and then zip-tied his ankles together.
Heading towards the beach here.
Hector was
Not
smaller
the
than
good
Angel,
kind.
who looked similar to the dead blonde in the SUV, except for his coloring. Both Hector and Angel were dark-haired, as she'd expected from the suit guy's description. Hector was no more than medium height and lean, fit, but not in a way that would stand out on the street. He was clean-shaven, and his skin was unmarked, at least the part she could see. He wore a long-sleeved black athletic shirt. Angel had tattoos on 3 of his fingers, and 1 on the side of his neck. Hector was smarter. If you were going to do wet work for a living, it was better to blend in. Avoid features that any witness could easily describe to the police sketch artist.
But you're out of the bunker, so that's a good thing.
A huge suppressed magnum lay inches from Hector's right hand. The sniper rifle was holstered across his back. She pulled the magazine from the rifle, took the massive handgun, and carried them back to the hallway to dump them over the stair railing. She heard them thud against the hard wood below. One of them made a metallic chink when it hit the previously discarded weapons. She turned back to secure Hector. The body lying in her storage room was gone. She ripped the shotgun out of its holster and pressed her back against the wall beside the door. There was no sound. He would have to come through the door. When he did,
next stop,
she would shoot him.
Let's hope for some
Even
fairway.
the most experienced assassin would be incapacitated with his legs blown off. When the movement came, it was not through the door. Angel began to writhe, moaning in Spanish. In the split second that Alex was distracted, a shadow peeled off from Angel's body and flew straight at her, knocking the shotgun from her hands and sending them both crashing toward the ground. She braced for the impact, even while wrestling with the hands that were trying to strip the gun from her waist. His hands were stronger than hers, but then the crash came, and with it, the shattering of tiny glass bulbs.
No good. Pretty
She could
deep
feel the
rough
scalding
here.
gas sear her neck,
Sugarcoat it.
the exposed skin around the base of her mask, and she knew she would probably look sunburned there for a few hours, but her eyes and lungs were protected. Her attacker was not prepared. He choked, his hands flying of their own accord to his throat, his blinded eyes. She whirled, 38 already drawn and shot, aiming for his kneecap. She hit him in the left thigh instead. He crumpled to that side and rolled into Angel, who was thrashing in earnest now, straining to pop the zip ties from his wrists. They were heavy-duty restraints, but he was a strong man. She couldn't handle them both. She was going to have to make a choice, quickly. Angel's head was the closest thing to her. She fired twice into the top of it. He went limp. Hector was gasping and scrubbing at his eyes at the same time as he was trying to roll away from her toward the stairs. She sprinted after him, hugging the wall to avoid his reach. He wasn't in control enough to make a grab for her yet. She pulled the bolt cutters from her waist and clubbed the back of his head. His convulsing jerked to a stop. This was all going to be a wasted effort if she'd killed him, but she had to secure him before she could even check for a pulse. To be safe, she put an additional bullet through his left kneecap, then threw the 38 over the banister to the floor below. It had only one bullet left anyway. She used another zip tie to attach his uninjured right leg to the railing at the ankle and the knee, then his right arm at the wrist and the elbow. He wouldn't be able to do much with his left leg. For lack of a better option, she zip-tied his left hand to Angel's big black boot. Angel's inert form had to weigh 270, at least. It was better than nothing. She touched Hector's wrist, marginally satisfied to locate a steady pulse. He was alive. Whether or not his brain function was preserved, she would have to wait to see. She decided to double the cables just in case. While she was tightening the second tie around Angel's boot, she heard the change in Hector's breathing as he came to. He didn't cry out, though he had to be in tremendous pain. That wasn't a good thing. She'd interrogated other hardened soldiers with good control over their reactions to pain.
Great contact.
It took a long time
nice swing.
to break them. But those men had loyalty to their companions or their missions. She was confident this was a hit for hire. Hector would owe nothing to the people who'd given him the job. She scooted a few feet away with the Glock gripped tight in her hands, watching to see how well her containment system would perform. It was too dark. She got up and backed toward the bathroom doorway, keeping her eyes on the figure on the ground. She felt behind her until she found the light switch and flipped it on. Hector's face was turned toward her. His dark eyes, although still tearing, were intensely focused. His face showed no evidence of the pain he was in. It was a disconcerting gaze, though his face was in other ways one of the most ordinary she had ever seen. His features were even and nondescript. He wasn't attractive, but he wasn't ugly either. It was the kind of face that would be extremely hard to pick out of a lineup.
Going after 9, not amazing,
Why
but
haven't
not
you killed
bad.
me?
He asked,
All
his
right,
voice
let's haul
hoarse
off
from the chemicals.
And just
Other than
smash
that,
this next
his
drive.
voice was unremarkable. He had no accent at all. He could have been a network news anchor. No hint of where he came from in his inflections. I want to know who hired you. Her voice rasped through the mask, slightly distorted. It sounded a little less human. She hoped that would throw him. He nodded once, as if to himself. She saw minute shifts in his hands as he tested his bonds.
Why would I tell you anything?
He didn't say it angrily or as a challenge. He just sounded curious. Do you have any idea who I am? He didn't answer, his face neutral. That's the first reason why you should tell me what you know. Because whoever sent you out here didn't give you the information you needed to be successful. They didn't prepare you for what you were facing. You don't owe them anything.
I don't owe you anything,
he pointed out, still in a polite conversational voice. His fingers stretched downward, trying to reach the zip tie. No, you don't. But if you don't talk to me, I'll hurt you. That's the second reason. He weighed that.
And the third reason, if I talk, you'll let me live.
Would you believe me if I promised you that? He sighed. He thought for a moment and then asked,
But how will you know whether to believe what I tell you?
I know most of it. I just want you to fill in a few details.
I'm afraid I can't help you much. I have a manager. He works as the middleman. I never saw the person who paid for this.
Just tell me what your manager told you. He considered that, then twitched his shoulders as if to shrug.
I don't like your offer. I think you could do better.
Then I'll have to persuade you. Chapter 19. He watched with a poker face as she stuck the Glock in her waistband and retrieved the bolt cutters from the floor by Angel's leg. She'd considered bringing the welding iron. Fire could be more painful than almost anything else, and many people had related phobias. But Hector was a professional. She didn't have the time to break him down with pain. His resistance would be too high. What would frighten him more than agony would be losing his physical edge. If he didn't have a trigger finger, he couldn't do his job. She'd start with something less vital to him, but he would be able to see the inevitable coming. If he could survive tonight, he would want to do it with functional hands. So he would have to talk to delay her. Hector's left hand was most convenient. As she fit the metal blades around his pinky finger, he curled the rest into a fist and fought harder against the ties. She kept a tight hold on the handles, knowing what she would be thinking in his position. If he could get control of the cutters, he would have a chance to free himself. Sure enough, he tried to kick out with his left leg, despite the excruciating pain it must have caused him. She dodged the blow, moved a few feet higher, then refit the cutters to the base of his folded finger. These were made for cutting through rebar, and she kept the blades sharp. It didn't take too much muscle on her part to snap the blades together. She watched his reaction. He thrashed against the ties ineffectually. His face turned dark red, and the vessels pulsed in his forehead. He gasped and panted, but he didn't scream. Sometimes people don't think I'm serious, she told him. It's good to get that misconception out of the way.
Sitting at 3 over for the
Right
round
now,
here.
Hector would be thinking about the amount of time that could pass before it was
Hole
too
number
late
11.
to reattach a finger. He could live without a pinky, but he needed his hands, and he must know she wasn't going to stop there. She would emphasize her point. She snagged the warm, bloody finger off the floor and backed to the bathroom, keeping her eyes on him as he writhed in his bonds. Even the best zip ties weren't foolproof. She made sure he was watching as she dropped the finger into the toilet and flushed. Now he
that was a
knew that
swing.
she wasn't going to leave him options. Hopefully, it would encourage him to give her what she wanted, quickly. Hector, she told him, as he stared,
you're about
gritting his teeth,
140 yards
fighting
out
to
here.
control the pain. Don't be stupid. It's not going to hurt you to tell me what I want to know. It is going to hurt you if you don't. Your trigger fingers are next, then the rest of them. This is what I do, and I can keep it up for as long as I need to. Don't you see? They sent you after the wrong people, Hector. They told you nothing about what you were up against. They just handed you to me.
Solid swing.
Why protect them?
You're going after them next?
He grunted through his teeth. Of course. His eyes were full of venom and hatred. She'd seen the look before, but in the past,
2 over for the
she'd viewed it
round.
from a much better protected position. If he somehow got his hands on her, if their roles were
All
reversed,
right, let's pop this in the
she
fairway.
would do what she had to in order to die immediately.
I didn't come for you.
He spit out unwillingly.
I was sent for a man. I was given a picture. I was told there would be a second man. But that the second would be easy. The first would be hard. I never saw that one.
When were you hired?
Last night.
Then you rounded up some extra help and came in today, she guessed. From where?
Miami.
This is going
How
places.
did you know where to come?
They gave me 3 addresses. This was the second try.
I guess I don't need to ask what happened at the first place. His seething
Looking at
fury
around
twisted into a
155
ghoulish
yards
smile.
out from here.
They were old. A man and a woman. They didn't fit the description. But I was paid well. Doesn't hurt to be thorough. And all it cost me was 2 bullets.
She nodded. He could see nothing of her expression behind the gas mask, but she kept her features smooth out of habit. How far away was the other house?
15 minutes south of the little town.
Where did the addresses come from?
No one told me that. I didn't ask.
She
Looks
hefted
like
the bolt
you're
cutters.
gonna hit some sand
No
here.
guesses?
The other place was nothing like this. I saw nothing in common.
Could be a lie, but it would make more sense for it to be the truth. Why would Karsten or whoever was calling the shots at the agency need to give the hitman more than this location? She puzzled over it for a moment, trying to think of another avenue to explore. Her eyes never left his hands. What kinds of things might link Arnie's home to random others? What similarity would generate a list of otherwise unconnected addresses? With a sinking feeling, she thought of a possibility, one she did not like much. What kind of car was in the driveway of the first place? He seemed surprised by her question.
An old truck.
White?
Well,
With a
at
black
least you are
camper.
on the green.
Her jaw
All right,
clenched.
14 feet to the hole.
So they'd gotten a very good look at Arnie's truck, the one he'd said had 2 perfect matches around town. They must have gotten Daniel on camera, or they wouldn't be so certain of the make and model. Daniel would have had to drive down the main drag, passing the bank. That was probably how they'd done it. Why bother questioning the girl who called in about the missing teacher? Just take the CC camera footage from town and get something solid, then call the DMV. They didn't get everything. If the
Solid
plates had
stroke
been
on that
clear,
one.
that couple across town wouldn't be dead.
Okay, so
But they knew
that'll keep
Daniel
you
was
at
alive
2
because Kevin
over for the round.
wouldn't have made that mistake. Also, even in a
All
grainy
right,
black and white
let's
video,
let her rip.
Daniel didn't look exactly like Kevin, if you knew what to look for. She needed Arnie's truck. She needed it badly. It was inconspicuous. They couldn't exactly roll through town in the Batmobile and escape notice. Where was she going to get another vehicle out here? She took a step back, feeling tired. She'd had a good resting place, but now, the hunt was on again. It didn't even matter that most likely the bad guys thought she was dead, because they knew Daniel was alive. Liability. Hector's right hand was busy. He was
Great
scratching at the zip
contact.
tie with the tips of his fingers, almost dislocating his wrist in the process. It didn't look like he was trying to break it or even get to the locking tab. What was he doing? She reached for the Glock. It would probably be safest to put a round through that hand. A single concussive shot exploded in the silence, much louder than she would have expected it to sound from outside the house. Daniel. Her eyes had darted to the direction of the shot, though she knew better. In the 1/4 of a second it took her to recall them, while simultaneously ripping her Glock from the holster, Hector's fingers found what they were searching for. He extracted a 5-inch serrated blade from the cuff of his sleeve. It sawed across the taut zip tie with a twanging snap. The same motion turned
Heading
into
for
a cast.
the green
She
here.
fired into his central mass as the blade flew at her face.
Okay, we're putting from around
She tried to dodge
15
while she
feet
kept
out.
shooting, ignoring the sudden pressure that wasn't quite pain as it slashed across her jaw. Wasn't pain yet, but would be soon, when the drug wore off. She could feel the heat of the blood coating her neck as she continued firing into Hector's chest until the clip was empty. Hector lay still, his open eyes still pointed in her direction, but no longer focused. Moving in swift, jerky bursts, she wiped down the Glock and threw it over the banister, wiped and holstered the cutters, and retrieved her shotgun from the end of the hall, trying to concentrate on what to do next. She didn't know what was waiting for her outside. As she crept down the stairs, her fingers worked quickly to make sense of the new damage.
2 over for the round.
The assassin's blade had just missed her carotid artery, hitting the bottom corner of her jaw and slicing halfway through her earlobe. The loose piece dangled against her neck. Beautiful. On the ground floor, she spared a second to take one quick look at Arnie. His face was turned to the floor. She could see only what was left of the back of his head. It was obvious that he hadn't suffered, but that was weak comfort. She'd planned to gather evidence on her way out, but she wasn't sure she had time for that now. The dogs were quiet. Did that mean everything was okay? Well, after the volley of shots upstairs, it wasn't like anyone outside was unaware of her presence. She sidled over to the door and crouched beside it. Lower, she thought, than anyone would aim to shoot through the drywall. She reached over and pulled the door open a crack. No one shot at her. "Daniel?" she called loudly. "Alex!" he shouted back. He sounded as relieved as she suddenly felt. "You're okay?" she checked. "Yes. Are you?" "I'm coming out." "Don't shoot."
Nice.
She walked through the front door with her hands raised above her head,
1 over for
just
the
in
round.
case. Einstein popped off the floor beside Lola and was at her heels.
Okay,
She dropped
here
her
we go.
arms and jogged toward the Humvee. It was lit only by the lamps shining through the front door and windows, but from this vantage it appeared to be totally unharmed by their intentional accident. Daniel slid out of the front seat. "The shot?" she asked, her voice quieter as she approached. The dogs around the Humvee seemed relaxed enough, but...
"The last man. He must have climbed the side of the house to get away from the dogs. He was trying to edge around to the roof of the porch."
Daniel gestured with the rifle to a dark mass crumpled on the gravel close to the east corner of the house.
Heading towards the beach
She pushed
here.
the gas
Not
mask
good
back on
kind.
her forehead, carefully moving the straps on the left side over her ear without touching it. She adjusted her trajectory, edging closer to the broken figure. Einstein shadowed her. A large, standard German shepherd was pacing not too far off, seeming uninterested in the body. Einstein suddenly sped up and passed her. He sniffed the body a few times while she cautiously picked her way forward, and then he turned to her with his tail wagging. "Is that the all clear?" she muttered. He kept wagging. She leaned in for a closer look. It didn't take long to see all there was to see. Impressed, she turned and walked back to the Humvee. Daniel was standing beside the open driver's side door, looking unsure what to do. He still didn't appear to be having any kind of shock reaction. "Nice shot," she said. "One bullet, literally right between the eyes. It couldn't have been more perfect."
"I wasn't very far away."
He stepped toward her, closing the distance, and his gloved hands wrapped tightly around the tops of her arms. Then he gasped and spun to the side, wheeling her around so that the light was no longer behind her.
"How much of this blood is yours?"
"Not much," she said. "I'm good."
"Your ear?"
"Yeah, that's not going to help anything, is it? You handy with a needle and thread?"
Looks like you're
head
gonna
jerked
hit
back
some
in
sand
surprise.
here. Beach
What?
to beach.
It's not hard.
The
I can
happiest
talk
of
you through it.
times.
One thing first. She shook out of his grasp and ran back up the porch stairs. Lola was still curled in the same spot. She raised her head and thumped her tail limply when she saw Alex. "Hey, Lola. Good girl. Let me take a look at you." Alex sat cross-legged in front of her. She stroked Lola's side with one hand while searching for the wound with the other.
"Is she okay?"
Daniel asked softly. He was on the other side of the porch banister, his elbows resting on the edge of the floorboards. He seemed unwilling to get any closer to the house. She didn't blame him. Lola whimpered as Alex felt along her legs. "She's lost some blood. It looks like the bullet went through her back left leg. I can't tell if it hit bone, but the bullet definitely passed through. She was lucky." He reached through the slats to rub Lola's nose.
Poor girl.
The stuff in the back of the Humvee must be in total chaos. I'm going to hunt up the first aid kit. Keep her calm, will you?
Sure.
Einstein followed Alex back to the vehicle.
Not too bad. You're on the
just
fairway.
as he'd trailed her to the porch. It surprised her how the silent support buoyed her, made her feel safe, despite all the evidence to the contrary. She opened the back of the Humvee, and an impatient Khan almost knocked her down. She dodged out of his way just in time as he sprang over her. She imagined the cargo hold was tight for him, though she had plenty of space as she crawled inside. Guns and ammo were strewn haphazardly, loose bullets rolling under her knees. There wasn't time to organize. Her conversation with Hector had been cut short. She hadn't been able to ask one last vital question. What happens when the job is done? Who was expecting a call, and when? At least there was the third house still waiting, unless Hector had made a call between the first and second stops. Had he called his manager, told him which address had been cleared, and which he was heading to next? Was the manager waiting for another call? Would he have realized that the call was overdue? She located the duffel that held her first aid kit.
Looks like a
There was nothing she
24-footer
could do
from here.
now except move fast and make the right decisions. The only problem was, she still didn't know exactly what those right decisions were. Okay, she huffed as she and Einstein arrived back at Lola's side. She knelt beside Lola's legs and quickly realized it was too dark for her to see what she was doing. I need you to bring the Humvee around and give me some light, she said. Daniel lurched quickly away from the porch, a massive shadow hulking beside him. Khan, still on duty. She wondered how Khan and Einstein had decided to switch assignments. She pulled off her tactical gloves and replaced her bloody latex gloves with a fresh pair. She was just injecting Lola with a mild sedative when the brilliant lights of the Humvee came shooting through the banister slats.
3 over for the
She
round.
adjusted her position so the glare was out of her face and on the wound. It looked like a clean through
Okay,
and
let's
through.
send this little ball
She
on
waited
its
for
way.
Lola's eyes to droop before she started cleaning the wound. Lola's leg twitched a few times, but she didn't cry out. Antiseptic, then ointment, then gauze, then a splint and more gauze. It should heal well if she could keep Lola off it. She blew out a sigh. What were they going to do about all these dogs? What's next? Daniel asked when she was done. He was on the ground beside the porch, rifle in hands, scanning the dark plains around them. Can you throw a couple of stitches in my ear while I've got the stuff out? He balked. I won't get it right. It'll be easy, she assured him. Haven't you ever sewn on a button? Not through human flesh, he muttered, but he slung his rifle over his shoulder and started up the stairs as he spoke. She lit a match from the kit and sterilized the needle. It wasn't the highest standard of medical technique, but it was the best she could do under the circumstances. She waved the needle quickly
Okay,
back
we're
and
sitting
forth
at
to cool
around
it,
110
then poked the
yards
suture
to the
thread
pin.
through the eye and knotted one end. She held it out to him along with a fresh pair of gloves. He put the gloves on and then reached slowly for the needle. He didn't seem to want to touch it. She tilted her head back and poured antiseptic across the wound, waiting for the scorching sting to run the course of the cut, all the way to her ear. Then she angled her jaw toward him, making sure she was in the brightest beam of light. Probably just needs 3 little ones. Start at the back and pull through. What about a local anesthetic? I've got enough painkiller in me already.
This one's for Birdie.
She lied. She could feel the slash across her jaw like a brand, but she was out of survive, and anything else she could use would incapacitate her, at least partially. This wasn't an emergency. It was only pain. He knelt down beside her. He put his fingers gently under the edge of her chin. This was very close to your jugular, he gasped, horrified. Yeah, he was good. His face was out of her sight, so she couldn't interpret the little hitching sound in his breath. Do it, Daniel.
Nice.
We have to hurry. He sucked in a deep breath, and then she felt the needle
Sitting
pierce
at
her
2
earlobe.
over for the round.
She was braced for it. She kept it off her face and didn't let her hands clutch into
Nice
fists.
solid birdie on that last
She'd
hole.
learned to
We got
localize
another
her
birdie in
reactions.
the works here.
She clenched the muscles in her abdomen, letting the pressure vent there. "Good," she said, as soon as she was sure she could keep her voice even. "You're doing great. Now just fit the pieces together and stitch them in place." While she spoke, his fingers moved quickly through the task. She couldn't feel the needle in the severed bottom portion of her earlobe, so she only had to deal with the pain when he perforated the top half. Just 3 little stabs. It wasn't too bad after the first.
"Do I tie a knot or something?"
he asked. "Yes, in the back, please." She could feel the pull of the thread tightening as he worked.
"It's done."
She looked up at him and smiled. It tugged at her slashed jaw. "Thank you. I would have had a hard time managing that on my own." He touched her cheek.
"Here, let me bandage this for you."
She held still while he covered the wound with ointment, then taped a strip of gauze to her cheek. He wrapped her ear front and back.
Well, at least you're on the green. That is
Probably
always
should
good.
have cleaned it first.
Okay, we're putting
he
from
muttered.
around
It will do for
15
now.
feet out.
Let's put Lola in the Humvee.
I'll get her.
Daniel gently lifted the sleeping Lola into his arms. Her long front paws and ears dangled out from his arms and wiggled with every step he took. Alex felt a bubble of inappropriate humor rising in her chest and swallowed against it. There was no time for hysteria. Daniel laid Lola in the space behind the passenger seat. There were only the 2 front seats in the Humvee. Kevin had removed the rest to leave room for cargo, she guessed.
"What now?"
Daniel asked as he walked back to where she was still sitting on the porch. He was probably wondering why she wasn't doing something
Sitting
proactive.
at 3 over.
He didn't know she
Looking
was
around.
procrastinating. She took a deep breath and steadied her shoulders.
Coming off a bit of a
Give me the
bogey
phone.
on that last hole.
It's time
Let's see
to
if we
talk to
can
your
do
brother.
better here.
"Should we be moving?"
There's one thing more I need to do, but I want to tell him first.
"What?"
We really ought to burn the house down. His eyes widened as he stared at her. Slowly, he pulled the phone from his vest pocket.
"I should make the call,"
he said. "He already hates me," she countered.
"But this was my fault."
"You weren't the one who hired a team of hitmen." He shook his head and pressed the button to power up the phone. "Fine," she muttered. As she packed up her first aid supplies, she
Okay, we are
watched
very
Daniel from
deep
the
in the
corner
rough.
of her eye.
Careful with this one.
He pulled up the only number that had ever called, but before he could touch it, the phone rang again. Daniel sucked in a deep breath, the same way he had before making the first pass on her ear. She imagined this conversation would be the harder of the tasks. He hit the screen. She could hear Kevin shrieking so loudly that at first she thought the phone was on speaker mode.
"You don't hang up on me, you..." "Kev, it's me. Kev, it's Danny." "What the hell is happening?" "It's my fault, Kev. I was an idiot. I ruined everything. I'm so sorry." "What are you babbling about?" "Arnie's dead, Kev.
Solid
I'm so
swing.
sorry. And some of the dogs. I'm not sure how many. It's all my fault. I wish I could tell you how." "Put the poison lady on the phone!" "This is on me, Kev. I messed up."
Kevin's voice was calmer when he interrupted now.
"There's no time for this, Danny. Give her the phone. I need someone who can talk sense."
She stood up and reached for the phone. Daniel watched anxiously as she held it a few inches away from her ear.
"Are you secure?"
Kevin asked. Surprised by his businesslike detachment, she answered in the same tone. "For the moment, but we've got to move."
"Have you torched the house?"
"I was just about to."
"There's kerosene in the closet under the
29
stairs."
feet from the hole.
"Thanks."
"Call me when you're on the road."
He hung up. Well, that had gone better than she'd hoped. She handed the phone back to Daniel. His expression was blank with surprise. The gas in the house would long since have dissipated, so she didn't bother with the mask. Danny followed her inside, but she made Einstein keep watch at the door. "Get some clothes out of Kevin's room," she instructed. She could have sent him upstairs for the first set he'd borrowed, but that would take more time, and she didn't know how he would react to the bodies. She could see his eyes cutting away to the sofa that obscured Arnie, and then back to her.
That
They both had to
was
keep it together.
absolutely fine.
They still had a long
cutting.
night ahead of them if they were going to be alive
Finding
tomorrow.
ourselves at 3 over par.
When you
as we
have
wind
enough
things
for